I love the disdain with which you heard that text today. It might be my favorite moment in the last month. Just like men, right? It was the women, God. There was a master weaver named Marisol, and her family had passed down the tradition of creating these breathtaking tapestries that told the story of life itself. And each tapestry was woven with these vibrant threads, reds and blues and yellows, that together formed these intricate patterns. And each thread was a symbol of a moment, a relationship, a promise of love. And one day, while working on a particular beloved tapestry that hung in her family's great hall for generations, Marisol noticed something that was unsettling. As she began to examine the fabric under the light of her workshop, she discovered that some of the threads in this tapestry had begun to fray and to break. They weren't the bold, intentional designs of this tapestry that she remembered. They were these subtle gaps in the fabrics and in the pictures that had been woven into it. The fabric had lost its strength. So Marisol sat down and she ran her fingers across the tapestry, feeling the smooth, continuous patterns that were suddenly disrupted by these ragged threads. And in that moment, she realized that these broken strands were not random flaws. They were silent markers of moments when love had faltered. They represented times when trust was neglected, when hearts were closed off, when the essential thread of connection was allowed to unravel. And in that moment, she recalled a parable that her grandma used to tell her that said, our lives are like tapestries. She realized these threads, these broken moments, represent when we fail to care for one another, when we ignore the call to love. In those moments, a thread breaks. And though one thread may seem small, each break begins to diminish the strength and the beauty of the whole work. Marisol understood that these threads mirrored the deeper truth of sin, a relational fracture, not just a broken rule, but a moment when we choose not to love. So she began mending the tapestry, carefully reweaving the broken strands with new threads of compassion and forgiveness and renewed commitment. With each stitch, she wasn't simply repairing a piece of cloth. She was restoring a connection and a trust that lay at the heart of her family's legacy. Our lives are like tapestries. Reflect on the moments when a thread might have frayed, when we, in our human imperfection, failed to respond to God's invitation to love. And in recognizing these fractures, what we do is actually open a door to healing, to mending the broken bonds through the power of forgiveness and restorative love. Over the last month at St. Matthew, we've been journeying through a sermon called 1 John. And in this 5 weeks of reading through every verse of that book, what we heard was one repeatable, unchanging truth. God is love. He says, beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. This has become our refrain over the last 5 weeks, a constant reminder that love isn't merely an abstract idea, but it is actually the very essence of who God is. So when God speaks of love, it's not a quiet, passive feeling. It's a dynamic call for action. It's an invitation to enter into a deep, transformative relationship with God and with one another. At St. Matthew, this foundational truth is woven into the fabric of our community. Imagine for a moment that the divine love that we've been learning about is our sacred DNA, a genetic code of grace and compassion that runs through every fiber of our beings. And just as DNA determines our unique identity, the love code of God embedded within us as his children also connects us. It connects us in this profound, invisible network, uniting us in the shared purpose and destiny and identity. And like DNA, this divine code is not dormant. It calls us to reflect God's love in our daily lives, and every act of kindness, every moment of listening, every gesture of care is a way for us to mirror the love that courses through our bodies. In the same way that DNA carries the blueprint of life, the love of God placed within us becomes the blueprint of how we relate to each other, how we relate to God, and even how we relate to ourselves. If God is love, then his children are love. And it invites us to live out justice and humility and deep relational connection with everybody we come in contact with. In essence, the love we inherit from God is the very foundation upon which our lives are built. It's both the source and the sustaining force for all community and connection. So if love is, as John says, the very fabric of our being, the code that connects us, then what happens when that code or that thread is disrupted? This brings us to a profound truth. Sin is not simply breaking rules. It's a relational fracture. It's the moment when we fail to honor our sacred DNA of love. It's a moment when we actually choose away from our humanity into something else. See, I think for too long we've seen sin merely as the breaking of some moral code, a checklist, right, of the transgressions over time. Church has been good at this throughout the centuries. We love to tell you what you shouldn't do. Each generation gives you a new list. I grew up, you're not supposed to play pool, you're not supposed to dance, you're not supposed to drink, you're not supposed to smoke. Next generation, we hand them a new set of rules, and we say, this is what it means to be a part of God. When the text tells us that what it means to be a part of God is to allow the love of God that is us to course through our being out into the world. And so in doing so, it's allowed us to become detached from the very reality of what our actions cause in our lives and in our relationships and in our world. We got here by embracing a view of sin that is merely an abstract disobedience, where the emphasis was on what rules were broken of whatever the newest code was that we held, rather than the reality of deep relational wounds inflicted. We see this in the life of and in the day of Jesus through the story of the Pharisees, right? Who gave people tons of rules, which communicated that if you break this rule, you're living in sin. While the real breach of broken relationship went pushed under the rug and tore at the identity of who we are as a community and as a people. And this perspective led us to compartmentalize our failures, treating them as isolated mishaps rather than as cracks in an interconnected tapestry of our lives. And the effect of this shift is profound. It fostered an environment where we feel more isolated, where communities are weakened by unaddressed anger and mistrust, where the natural impulse to care for one another is stifled by fear and indifference and complacency and a radical, unhealthy individuality. So what if? What if instead we began to understand sin as my mentor Jim Keenan teaches, the failure to bother to love? What if sin is merely the failure to bother to love? Consider the story from Genesis. In the account of the fall, where Adam and Eve's decision to hide from God was more than disobedience. It wasn't that they broke a rule, it was a withdrawal from the relationship that they had with God. You get in this beautiful metaphor, picture of this scripture, that God walked with them every evening, right? There's this understood that God was coming to do what God did every night, to take a stroll with Adam and Eve in the garden. And this time when he comes and he calls out to them, there's no answer, no response, because somehow they decided to step back from their relationship with God, and in doing so, it unleashed a whole set of chaotic realities in their life. And all of a sudden, they began to see their identity as broken and shameful. And they hid because they were naked. I love the question that God asks, who told you were naked? Right? Who told you that you should have shame? That's not what this is about. It's about being with me, walking with me in the cool of the evening. And that fracture, that connection to God reoriented how they defined their own beings. Changed the way they saw themselves. But get this, it didn't change the way that God saw them. God didn't tell them they were ever naked. God didn't tell them they should have shame. It's something they brought onto themselves. They lost sight of their own childness in their relationship with God. So later the story moves on, and Cain and Abel reveal how jealousy and unaddressed anger can tear apart the bonds of family relationships. Here, sin is not merely an isolated mistake, but it's a rupture in trust and intimacy, a failure to reflect the divine love that actually binds us and makes us who we are. In our lives today, whether we allow pride or fear or apathy to override our natural inclination to care, we are in effect breaking connection. Each time we choose to ignore a cry for help or to withhold our love, we introduce a tear into the tapestry of our relationships. And it's a tear that weakens the overall and overarching integrity of community and family and neighborhood and world. This understanding of sin as relational fracture, a failure to bother to love, challenges us to rethink our failures, not as these isolated misdeeds, but as a missed opportunity to engage fully with the love that is our identity. That's our heritage. It's who we are. And it reminds us that our daily choices, however small, contribute to this larger tapestry of connection and disconnection. And it calls us with even greater urgency to repair those broken threads by reweaving our relationship with compassion and forgiveness and intentional acts of care. Now imagine for a moment returning back to that tapestry that we talked about in the beginning. A tapestry with tears and frayed threads where our lives have experienced brokenness. Now picture a skilled restorer stepping into the workshop, not to condemn the damage, but to gently mend it. This restorer is none other than Jesus. And Jesus enters our story as the embodiment of restorative love. In his life and his death and his resurrection, we see a radical invitation. He doesn't come with a list of condemnations for every broken thread that we've created, but instead with a promise that every tear can and will be restored. And he doesn't come asking to have us to have everything together. He receives us with all the tears and broken threads, and he shows us that while sins we've committed and sins that have occurred to us have actually frayed our fabrics and our relationships and caused hurt and pain, that it is not the end of the story. That his love is powerful enough to reweave them into something even more beautiful than before. Unless you need a place to find this in the scriptures, go no further than when Jesus calls his first disciples. He steps up to the shore of Galilee and he meets Peter, who was, kind of a mess of a fisherman. And he doesn't say, hey, Peter, I would love for you to follow me, but here are the 10 things you need to get right. And then meet me here at the beach when that's all done, and we'll be there. And he doesn't say to the sons of Zebedee, James and John, he doesn't say to them, listen, I know you had a really violent past, but why don't you get that fixed and right, and then when you're ready, come join me, and we'll do this thing called life together. No, what you see in the sacred text are these really broken, messy humans who Jesus says, come, follow me, and they do. And then over the next 3 years, you see Jesus teaching them a new way to be. And I would love to say that even after those 3 years, that they got it together. But guess what? This is what I love about the text. You see Thomas, who's hanging out after Jesus has died and resurrected, and Thomas is like, you guys are full of you-know-what. I'm not going to believe it until I can see it and touch it. And Jesus doesn't enter the room and say, Thomas, for 3 years, you're such an idiot. No, he says, here, touch what you need to touch. I'm here in all your humanity. What I long for more than anything is to be in relationship, that you understand that God is in me and I am in God, and because you are in me, you are in God, and all of this leads to a connection in which the world will fully know who God is because they see the love of God coursing through me, which courses through you and makes us who we are. It is our identity. Jesus reminds us that our identity of children of God remains intact even when the fabric is frayed. And in that moment, our lost threads can be gathered and woven back into a larger tapestry of his love. We see it again in Luke chapter 10 when Jesus is sitting with Mary and Martha is bustling around the kitchen, concerned with every detail of the meal, and Mary sits quietly at Jesus' feet. And she's just absorbing all of his words and his presence, and Martha, as the type A, overwhelmed by her duties, grows frustrated at her sister and believing that Mary should get off her butt and start helping. And it's in that moment that Jesus reminds her that Mary's chosen the better portion. A reminder that being with him in a moment of genuine connection is all the foundation we need. And this story invites us to see that our relationship with Jesus is not about achieving perfection through the busy work of ticking off rules. Instead, it's about opening our hearts to God's love, even when our lives are full of noise and distraction. It's about recognizing the true essence of our identity, our sacred love code, and residing in our ability to connect deeply with him and through him and with one another. And again, lest you think that it's simple when Mary and Martha, just a few chapters later, are mourning the death of their brother Lazarus. Jesus comes in to that environment, and Mary is just weeping, and Martha is, where the heck have you been, Jesus? And Jesus doesn't say, Mary, stop being type A. Stop achieving. Stop trying to hold it all together. He simply grieves with them. We get this beautiful verse that says Jesus wept. He entered their grief and their pain, and he was with them. And he calls Lazarus out of the tomb and proclaims that he is the resurrection and the life, that even death cannot sever the bonds of love that God has woven into our very beings. So how do we respond to this invitation? First, I think there's some work that we have, right? As the people of God, we have to recognize fractures in our tapestry, in our community, in our world, in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our homes, in our own lives. Each of us has at times turned away from the call to love, perhaps clinging on to our pride or harboring unspoken resentments or simply being too busy to bother to love. And acknowledging these moments, looking at our own tapestries and acknowledging these broken pieces helps us step forward into healing. And church, not all of the broken places on our tapestry are ones that we created. Some of them have happened to us, where people have come along with scissors and cut at the fabric of who we are. And it feels painful. And every time we see those, it feels hard. And anger and bitterness and sadness begin to be a part of those pieces of our fabric. So I invite you to take a moment this week, perhaps in a quiet corner of your home with a piece of paper or a journal, and to start thinking about your own tapestry. Where do you sense rupture in your community, in your life, in your family, in your friends? Where do you feel a tear as you rub your fingers along your life? Where have you neglected to listen, even to your own spirit? Where have you withheld love out of fear or anger or apathy? In what ways have you allowed mistrust to be the root of relationships because you've been hurt by somebody else in the past? It's by honestly examining these questions that we begin the process of disintegrating our old habits and letting go of apathy and self-centeredness. And then comes the hard work of reintegration, a commitment to one daily act of love. This can be a simple, heartfelt conversation with a neighbor who, when you see her, you pull into your garage because you don't want to talk to her. Because you've taken a moment to realize that that person that you're seeing that you reject, part of what you're rejecting are their scars and their fabric. And a moment of merely taking the time to bother to love doesn't just heal you and put a new thread in your fabric, but it restores theirs as well. Or maybe it's offering a meal to someone who in need, or sending a note of encouragement to a friend, or joining Grow here in our kitchen on Tuesday to say to our unhoused friends, we see you in a world who claims you don't exist. We see you. These are the stitches that began to repair the broken tapestries of our lives and our world. So today, let's commit to mending the tapestries of our lives by simply allowing the great mender space to call us into new ways. One thoughtful, loving thread at a time. Let us listen deeply, act generously, and reflect honestly. And as we do so, we not only heal ourselves, but contribute to the healing of our world. Please pray with me. Gracious God, whose love is the very fabric of our being, help us to see the fractures in our lives and in our community. Grant us the courage to acknowledge our failures to love, to even bother to think about love and to strengthen and to mend the places where that exists. Teach us to listen with open hearts, to act with compassionate hands, and to commit ourselves each day to the work of restoration. May we always remember that in you, love is made whole. And through us, may your love shine brightly in a broken world. Amen.